Hey everybody, you're watching part 1 of the Careminds podcast episode with Desai, Senior Director of Engineering and Product Management at Verana Health. In this part 1 of the episode, Samir shares his perspective on what EMRs and EHRs do not address, to full extension when it comes to solving interoperability challenges, why the FHIR standard has slower adoption for smaller and or niche practices, the pains of custom integrations they have to go through in order to solve interoperability challenges. Hope you enjoy. Let's get started. Samir, thank you very much for joining me today in this Careminds podcast episode. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Daniel. Much appreciate the opportunity to share thoughts with your audience.
Samir's background would allow us to tap into the topic of interoperability challenges for smaller practices, more niche practices. In particular, Samir's background involves extensive experience in software development, more than 12 years. He's an HL7 certified specialist. He's been dealing with EHRs and EMRs his whole life. And I think that we start this episode with the definition of the problem space. It's 2023. Everybody's talking about the usage of the AI in healthcare. You've mentioned a pretty interesting insight that your AI algorithm is only as good as your incoming data. And you have to answer lots of questions with regards to where the data is coming from, how does the data structure look like, just to name a few. So let's start with the problem of lack of standardization.
Sure. Thank you for that generous introduction, Daniel. So I think, yes, you're right. I've been doing EHR space, especially the interoperability between EHR for a long time now. And the problem sadly has stays the same. So the problem is that when you look at across the EHRs, we call standards, but most of the healthcare space follows the standardized guidelines. And that's where the issue starts. So I think we have heard about everybody transitioning to FHIR. Now, especially in the space I work at, we're going across 50 different EHRs. So when you look at FHIR standard, the maturity of FHIR APIs across EHR varies a lot. So what that leads to is something like a simple example of like a patient information. Epic EHR, who is pretty mature in terms of how they send the data, might populate all the fields, but some other EHR may not populate the fields in the same place. Also, when we work in very specialty places, like we work currently at Verana with ophthalmology a lot, they have very specific ophthalmology EHRs, which may not have resources to do this FHIR implementation at the same standard. So now you're dealing with a set of EHRs who only want to talk to you in standard format. And then you're dealing with EHRs who do not have either the capabilities or the resources to help you out with standard format. But you have to build an interoperability program which allows everybody to participate in this AI journey. I don't want only the people who can afford to be on Epic, or they are large enough where the Epic or Cerner implementations make sense to participate in this AI revolution, but everybody should be able to. I think that's where the challenge usually starts. And FHIR, also the other thing we have to think about is there is a lot of customization in terms of how the workflows are built in the practices. So two Epic implementations still may not look the same. So the data may show up in a similar space, but we also work in a neurology space. And what we have seen is a lot of that information, even on Epic, resides in notes. So even the big hospitals, because they don't have templates, they usually follow notes to add like very important information about patients' current conditions, the progression of diseases and stuff like that, which is we don't have a standard fields called out for that. And this information is super important for actually building good algorithms, which can predict certain things, or we can suggest certain quality of care outcomes, or help improve the drugs and stuff like that. So that's where it comes out to. It's, as you said, the data is the new oil, but it's not on all the same format. So it's pretty important to make that happen.
Pretty good points. And also adding to that, you've touched base on the data complexity aspects, meaning that data is being stored in different formats, and that presents a problem of connecting and data exchange information between EHRs and EMRs, which FHIR is supposedly has to handle. And you also brought up a very good point that your FHIR is only as good as the EMR implementation of it that you're using. You've brought up an excellent example there. That being said, what are the other things? Would you also attribute like a slower pace of adoption for certain practices when it comes to the FHIR standards?
Yeah, I think it also depends on, because fire standard is still growing. It's in early stages, so it doesn't solve for all type of problems. A good example to go after is we are looking at right now at Verana. We help providers submit their MIPS reports, which actually also a lot of it goes around the administrative aspect of the data. So a good example will be, as a provider, have you reconciled the medication when the patient visited you? Now, this is a very specific administrative information. This may or may not have like an exact place to put the data in the FHIR standards, because FHIR standards evaluated as a clinical data standards first. I think it's now evaluating, like evolving into like financial space and administrative space and stuff like that. So there are a lot of domains, even in healthcare data, which is not specifically just the clinical information, which is required to the outcomes. Now we are also, as we move from transactional healthcare to value-based healthcare, now our data needs are even larger and the domains which we cover are even bigger, because we are looking at how do we define a value, and keeping somebody healthy is much difficult data problem to solve than just looking at a diagnosis and trying to cure a disease. So now it's just not healthcare. I'm not looking at just the lab results and the like radiology results and stuff like that. I want to go beyond that, right? I want to look at additional information like your socioeconomic factors and stuff like that. So now the data which is not just pertaining to healthcare is there. But if you look at a specific problem or even of the structured healthcare data, I think even there we have not reached the point. So I think in the newer world, we expect like now we're going to do something with images, we're going to do something with genomic data, and those always will reside in different formats. But I think the challenges are like even the core data, which is your clinical data, is not in standard format. And then that's where I think this pace of fire adoption is going to help us. I think the bigger EHRs have already taken the leap. I think everybody else will follow the suite.
Awesome, great points. Let's kind of narrow the things down to the technical aspect of, let's say, building a piece of software to augment existing EHR EMR that has, a hard time directly complying with FHIR. What sort of development challenges does this diversity and work in silos present to a developer or to a person that is handling, as I think you've came up with a pretty interesting term, the data plumbing aspect of this job?
Yeah, I think that's like, as I call it, it's not the what you call it's not the most shiny object which you can look at, not the most exciting opportunity for most of the engineers, but it's the most crucial job for healthcare space, because we can't wait till everybody follows the same standard. That means we have to work today and we have to solve those problems so we can move forward. Now the challenges which we usually face are, they start like, the easier challenge to innovate solve is a technical problem. Is how do I connect? You don't have an API and you have a traditional way of sharing data with like standard SFTP flat files and stuff like that. That's a easier problem to solve. We can also have some other technologies where we can directly connect to databases and extract information and stuff like that. I think the challenge just starts, which is on the second phase, which once the data resides into your environment, now you start making sense of that data, and you can't do that alone without like talking to your EHR vendor partners. And that's where this problem starts, because they have different priorities and do they want to help? And especially when the startups are coming up, you don't have the same leverage as the big organizations. So how do you convince EHR to work with you to figure out the mapping to a common kind of data model? And also because we are working across 30 to 50 separate EHRs. So when you are writing machine learning algorithms or curation algorithms, you can't write 50 different algorithms. So at some point, you have to take a hit to convert that to a common model where you can apply these algorithms at scale and move forward. So I think where the hindrance comes is this operational aspect, because your people dependency becomes much larger because of this just issue in between of saying, okay, how did you even capture this data in your EHR? I can also give you an example, because I think usually examples make it sense, like saying what sort of complexity I'm talking about. A simple example, I'll repeat that example of med reconciliation. We worked with four EHRs. Four EHRs did it in four different ways. So one EHR said, "Oh, I have this procedure code which I add into a procedure table when I perform this procedure." Somebody else said we have a flag in the encounter table where we say that we did this. Somebody said we had a reverse flag where we do this, and then the fourth EHR said, "I have a note template for that." So this is like, again, we are not at that AI level where I can automatically figure these things out. So there is a human doing these things. So your human dependency becomes much larger, and your teams have to be really big to work across 30 to 50 HRs. At this point, I'm not even introducing a practice level complexity to it, because you do have issues where non-standard EHRs, where they allow things to be added in an unstructured notes format. Each provider or nurse practitioner have their own way of adding stuff to the problem, to the notes and stuff like that. So that's where this technology challenges come. It's also figuring out these operational things, and where does it make sense to invest to automate, where it makes sense to actually just have people do it. And that's the challenges I think all startups work with. It's that happy balance, happy medium in between, where you have enough value for what you're trying to solve for. That's the kind of art or science of it.
Yeah, and I think you're also the right person to speak on these types of challenges, as your background also includes product management expertise. Thanks for watching this part one of the Careminds podcast episode with Samir Desai, Senior Director of Engineering and Product Management at Verana Health. Hit the like button if you like this content. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification. This helps the channel to produce more content like this. Consider leaving a comment below. Would be excited and thrilled to hear which topics in health tech, product development, and interoperability you would like us to cover next. Stay tuned for the part 2.